I can't say I feel relieved or satisfied. Just the opposite, I am crushed. Only my goal is reached. I know what I wanted to know. I have understood all that has happened to me since January. The nausea has not left me, and I don't believe it will leave me so soon. But I no longer have to bear it. It is no longer an illness or a passing fit. It is I. So I was in the park just now. The roots of the chestnut tree were sunk in the ground just under my bench. I couldn't remember it was a root anymore. The words had vanished, and with them the significance of things, their methods of use, and the feeble points of reference which men have traced on their surface. I was sitting, stooping forward, head bowed, alone in front of this black, naughty mass, entirely beastly, which frightened me. Then I had this vision. It left me breathless. Never until these last few days had I understood the meaning of existence. I was like the others, like the ones walking along the seashore, all dressed in their spring finery. I said, like them, the ocean is green. That white speck up there is a seagull. But I didn't feel that it existed or that the seagull was an existing seagull. Usually, existence hides itself. It is there, around us, in us. It is us. You can't say two words without mentioning it, but you can never touch it. When I believed I was thinking about it, I must believe that I was thinking nothing. My head was empty, or there was just one word in my head, the word to be. Or else I was thinking, how can I explain it? I was thinking of belonging. I was telling myself that the sea belonged to the class of green objects, or that the green was a part of the quality of the sea. Even when I looked at things, I was miles from dreaming that they existed. They looked like scenery to me. I picked them up in my hands. They served me as tools. I foresaw their resistance, but that all happened on the surface. If anyone had asked me what existence was, I would have answered in good faith that it was nothing, simply an empty form, which was added to external things without changing anything in their nature. And then all of a sudden, there it was, clear as day. Existence had suddenly unveiled itself. It had lost the harmless look of an abstract category. It was the very paste of things. This root was kneaded into existence. Or rather the root, the park gates, the bench, the sparse grass, all that had vanished, the diversity of things, their individuality, were only an appearance, a veneer. This veneer had melted, leaving soft, monstrous masses all in disorder, naked, in a frightful, obscene nakedness. I kept myself from making the slightest movement, but I didn't need to move in order to see. Behind the trees, the blue columns and the lampposts of the bandstand in the Valleda, in the midst of a mountain of laurel, all these objects, how can I explain? They inconvenienced me. I would have liked them to exist less strongly, more dryly, in a more abstract way, with more reserve. The chestnut tree pressed itself against my eyes. Green rust covered it up halfway up. The bark, black and swollen, looked like boiled leather. The sound of the water in the masquerade fountain sounded in my ears, made a nest there, filled them with signs. My nostrils overflowed with a green, putrid odor. All things, gently, tenderly, were letting themselves drift into existence like those relaxed women who burst out laughing and say, "It's good to laugh." In a wet voice, they were parading one in front of the other, exchanging abject secrets about their existence. I realized that there was no halfway house between non-existence and this flaunting abundance. If you existed, you had to exist all the way, as far as moldiness, bloatedness, obscenity were concerned. In another world, circles, bars of music keep their pure and rigid lines, but existence is a deflection. Trees, night blue pillars, the happy bubbling of a fountain, vital smells, little heat mists floating in the cold air, a red-haired man digesting on a bench. All this somnolence, all these meals digested together had its comic side. Comic? No. It didn't go as far as that. Nothing that exists can be comic. It was like a floating analogy, almost entirely elusive with certain aspects of vaudeville. We were a heap of living creatures, irritated, embarrassed at ourselves. We hadn't the slightest reason to be here. None of us, each one confused, vaguely alarmed, felt in the way in relation to the others. In the way. It was the only relationship I could establish between these trees, these gates, these stones. In vain I tried to count the chestnut trees, to locate them by their relationship to the Villeda, to compare their height with the height of the plane trees. Each of them escaped the relationship in which I tried to enclose it, isolated itself, and overflowed. Of these relations, which I insisted on maintaining in order to delay the crumbling of the human world, measures, quantities, and directions, I felt myself to be the arbitrator. They no longer had their teeth into things. In the way. The chestnut tree there, opposite me, a little to the left, in the way, the Villeda. And I, soft, beak, obscene, digesting, juggling with dismal thoughts, I too was in the way. Fortunately, I didn't feel it, although I realized it, but I was uncomfortable because I was afraid of feeling it. Even now I am afraid that it might catch me behind my head and lift me up like a wave. I dreamed vaguely of killing myself to wipe out at least one of these superfluous lives, but even my death would have been in the way. In the way, my corpse, my blood on these stones, between these plants, at the back of this smiling garden, and the decomposed flesh would have been in the way in the earth which would receive my bones at last, clean, stripped, peeled, proper and clean as teeth. It would have been in the way. I was in the way for eternity. The word absurdity is coming to life under my pen. A little while ago in the garden, I couldn't find it, but neither was I looking for it. I didn't need it. I thought without words on things with things. Absurdity was not an idea in my head or the sound of a voice, only this long serpent dead at my feet, this wooden serpent. Serpent or claw or root or vulture's talon, what difference does it make? And without formulating anything clearly, I understood that I had found the key to existence, the key to my nauseous, to my own life. In fact, all that I could grasp beyond that returns to this fundamental absurdity. Absurdity, another word. I struggle against words. Down there I touched the thing, but I wanted to fix the absolute character of this absurdity here. A movement, an event in the tiny colored world of men is only relatively absurd by relation to the accompanying circumstances. A madman's ravings, for example, are absurd in relation to the situation in which he finds himself, but not in relation to his delirium. But a little while ago, I made an experiment with the absolute or the absurd. This root, there was nothing in relation to which it was absurd. How can I put it in words? Absurd. In relation to the stones, the tufts of yellow grass, the dry mud of trees, the sky, the green benches, absurd, irreducible, nothing, not even a profound secret upheaval of nature could explain it. Evidently, I did not know everything. I had not seen the seed sprout or the tree grow, but faced with this great wrinkled pond, neither ignorance nor knowledge was important. The world of explanations and reasons is not the world of existence. A circle is not absurd. It is clearly explained by the rotation of a straight segment around one of its extremities. But neither does a circle exist. This root, on the other hand, existed in such a way that I could not explain it. Knotty, inert, nameless, it fascinated me, filled my eyes, brought me back unceasingly to its own existence. In vain to repeat, "This is a root." It didn't work anymore. I saw clearly that you could not pass from its function as a root, as a breathing pump, to this hard and compact skin of the sea lion, to this oily, callous, headstrong look. The function explained nothing. It allowed you to understand generally that it was a root, but not that one at all. This root, with its color, shape, its congealed movement, was below all explanation. Each of its qualities escaped it a little, flowed out of it, half solidified, almost became a thing. Each one was in the way in the root, and the whole stump now gave me the impression of unwinding itself a little, denying its existence to lose itself in a frenzied excess. I scraped my heel against this black claw. I wanted to peel off some of the bark, for no reason at all, out of defiance, to make the bare pink appear absurd on tan leather, to play with the absurdity of the world. But when I drew my heel back, I saw that the bark was still black. Black? I felt the word deflating, emptied of meaning with extraordinary rapidity. Black. The root was not black. There was no black on this piece of wood. There was something else. Black, like the circle, did not exist. I looked at the root. Was it more than black or almost black? But I soon stopped questioning myself because I had the feeling of knowing where I was. Yes, I had already scrutinized innumerable objects with deep uneasiness. I had already tried, vainly, to think something about them, and I had already felt their cold, inert qualities elude me, slip through my fingers. Adolphe's suspenders, the other evening in the railwaymen's rendezvous, they were not purple. I saw the two inexplicable stains on the shirt and the stone, the well-known stone, the origin of this whole business. It was not... I can't remember exactly just what it was that the stone refused to be, but I had not forgotten its passive resistance. In the hand of the self-taught man, I held it and shook it one day in the library, and then I had the feeling that it wasn't quite a hand. I had thought of a great white worm, but that wasn't it either. And the suspicious transparency of the glass of beer in the Café Mable. Suspicious, that's what they were. The sounds, the smells, the tastes. When they ran quickly under your nose like startled hares, you didn't pay too much attention. You might believe them to be simple and reassuring. You might believe that there was real blue in the world, and real red or real perfume of almonds or of violets, but as soon as you held on to them for an instant, this feeling of comfort and security gave way to a deep uneasiness. Colors, tastes, and smells were never real, never themselves, and nothing but themselves. The simplest, most undefinable quality had too much content in relation to itself, in its heart. That black against my foot, it didn't look like black, but rather the confused effort to imagine black by someone who had never seen black and who wouldn't know how to stop, who would have imagined an ambiguous being beyond colors. It looked like a color, but also like a bruise or a secretion, like an oozing and something else, an odor, for example. It melted into the odor of wet earth, warm, moist wood, into a black odor that spread like varnish over this sensitive wood, in a flavor of chewed sweet fiber. I did not simply see this black. Sight is an abstract invention, a simplified idea, one of man's ideas. That black, amorphous, weekly presence far surpassed sight, smell, and taste. But this richness was lost in confusion and finally was no more because it was too much. This moment was extraordinary. I was there, motionless and icy, plunged in a horrible ecstasy. But something fresh had appeared in the very heart of this ecstasy. I understood the nausea. I possessed it. To tell the truth, I did not formulate my discoveries to myself, but I think it would be easy for me to put them in words now. The essential thing is contingency. I mean that one cannot define existence as a necessity. To exist is simply to be there. Those who exist let themselves be encountered, but you can never deduce anything from them. I believe there are people who have understood this. Only they try to overcome this contingency by inventing a necessary causal being. But no necessary being can explain existence. Contingency is not a delusion, a probability which can be dissipated. It is the absolute, consequently, the perfect free gift. All is free, this park, this city, and myself. When you realize that, it turns your heart upside down and everything begins to float. As the other evening at the railwaymen's rendezvous, here is nausea. Here there is what those bastards, the ones on the Côte d'Ivoire and others, try to hide from themselves with their idea of their rights. But what a poor lie. No one has any rights. They are entirely free. Like other men, they cannot succeed in not feeling superfluous, and in themselves, secretly, they are superfluous. That is to say, amorphous, vague, and sad. How long will this fascination last? I was the root of the chestnut tree, or rather I was entirely conscious of its existence. Still detached from it, since I was conscious of it, yet lost in it, nothing but it, an uneasy conscience which, notwithstanding, let itself fall with all its weight on this piece of dead wood. Time had stopped. A small black pool at my feet, it was impossible for something to come after that moment. I would have liked to tear myself from that atrocious joy, but I did not even imagine it would be possible. I was inside. The black stump did not move. It stayed there, in my eyes, as a lump of food sticks in the windpipe. I could neither accept nor refuse it. At what cost did I raise my eyes? Did I raise them? Rather, did I not obliterate myself for an instant in order to be reborn in the following instant with my head thrown back and my eyes raised upward? In fact, I was not even conscious of the transformation. But suddenly, it became impossible for me to think of the existence of the root. It was wiped out. I could repeat in vain. It exists. It is still there, under the bench, against my right foot. It no longer meant anything. Existence is not something which let itself be thought of from a distance. It must invade you suddenly, master you, weigh heavily on your heart like a great motionless beast, or else there is nothing more at all. There is nothing anymore. There was nothing more. My eyes were empty and I was spellbound by my deliverance. Then suddenly it began to move before my eyes in light, uncertain motions. The wind was shaking the top of the tree. It did not displease me to see a movement. It was a change from these motionless beings who watched me like staring eyes. I told myself, as I followed the swinging of the branches, movements never quite exist. They are passages, intermediaries between two existences, moments of weakness. I expected to see them to come out of nothingness, progressively ripen, blossom. I was finally going to surprise beings in the process of being born. No more than 3 seconds and all my hopes were swept away. I could not attribute the passage of time to these branches groping around like blind men. This idea of passage was still an invention of man. The idea was too transparent. All these paltry agitations drew in on themselves, isolated. They overflowed the leaves and branches everywhere. They whirled about these empty hands, enveloped them with tiny whirlwinds. Of course, the movement was something different from a tree, but it was still an absolute. A thing. My eyes only encountered completion. The tips of the branches rustled with existence which unceasingly renewed itself and which was never born. The existing wind rested on the tree like a great blue bottle, and the tree shuddered. But the shudder was not a nascent quality of passing from power to action. It was a thing. A shudder thing flowed into the tree, took possession of it, shook it, and suddenly abandoned it, going further on to spin about itself. All was fullness and all was active. There was no weakness in time. All, even the least perceptible stirring, was made of existence. And all of this existence, which buzzed about this tree, came from nowhere and were going nowhere. Suddenly they existed, then suddenly they existed no longer. Existence is without memory. Of the vanished, it retains nothing, not even a memory. Existence everywhere, infinitely, in excess, forever and everywhere. Existence, which is limited only by existence. I sank down on the bench, stupefied, stunned by this profusion of beings without origin. Everywhere, blossomings, patchings out, my ears buzzed with existence, my very flesh throbbed and opened, abandoned itself to the universal burgeoning. It was repugnant. But why? I thought. Why so many existences, yet they all look alike? What good are so many duplicates of trees, so many existences missed, obstinately begun again and again missed, like the awkward efforts of an insect fallen on its back? I was one of those efforts. That abundance did not give the effect of generosity. Just the opposite. It was dismal, ailing, embarrassed at itself. Those trees, those great clumsy bodies, I began to laugh because I suddenly thought of the formidable springs described in books full of crackings, burstings, gigantic explosions. There were those idiots who came to tell you about willpower and the struggle for life. Hadn't they ever seen a beast or a tree? This plane tree with its scaling bark, this half-rotten oak, they wanted me to take them for rugged, youthful endeavors surging towards the sky. And the roots. I would have undoubtedly had to represent it as a voracious claw tearing at the earth, devouring its food. Impossible to see things that way. Weaknesses, frailties, yes. The trees floated, gushing towards the sky, or rather a collapse. At any instant I expected to see the tree trunks shrivel like weary wands, crumple up, fall on the ground in a soft folded black heap. They did not want to exist. Only they could not help themselves. So they quietly minded their own business. The sap rose up slowly through the structure, half reluctant, and the roots sank slowly into the earth. But at each instant they seemed on the verge of leaving everything there and obliterating themselves. Tired and old, they kept on existing against the grain simply because they were too weak to die. Because death could only come to them from the outside. Strains of music alone can proudly carry their own death within themselves like an internal necessity. Only they don't exist. Every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance. I leaned back and closed my eyes. But the images, forewarned, immediately leaped up and filled my closed eyes with existences. Existence is a fullness which men can never abandon. Strange images, they represented a multitude of things. Not real things, other things which looked like them. Wooden objects which looked like chairs, shoes, other objects which looked like plants. And then two faces. The couple who were eating opposite to me last Sunday in the Brasserie Vézelay. Fat, hot, sensual, absurd with red ears. I could see the woman's neck and shoulders, nude existence. Those two, it suddenly gave me a turn. Those two were still existing somewhere in Bouville, somewhere. In the midst of smells, this soft throat rubbing up luxuriously against smooth stuffs nestling in lace, and the woman picturing her bosom under her blouse thinking, my titties, my lovely fruits, smiling, mysteriously attentive to the swelling of her breasts which tickled. Then I shouted and found myself with my eyes wide open. Had I dreamed of this enormous presence? It was there in the garden, toppled down into the trees, all soft, sticky, soiling everything, all thick, a jelly. And I was inside. I with the garden. I was frightened, furious. I thought it was so stupid, so out of place. I hated this ignoble mess. Mounting up as high as the sky, spilling over, filling everything with its gelatinous slither, and I could see depths upon depths of it reaching far beyond the limits of the garden, the houses, the Bouville, as far as the eye could reach. I was no longer in Bouville. I was nowhere. I was floating. I was not surprised. I knew it was the world. The naked world suddenly revealing itself, and I choked with rage at this gross, absurd being. You couldn't even wonder where all this sprang from, or how it was that a world came into existence. Rather than nothingness, it didn't make sense. The world was everywhere, in front, behind. There had been nothing before it. Nothing. There had never been a moment in which it could not have existed. That was what worried me. Of course, there was no reason for this flowing larva to exist, but it was impossible for it is not to exist. It was unthinkable. To imagine nothingness, you had to be there already, in the midst of the world, eyes wide open and alive. Nothingness was only an idea in my head, an existing idea floating in this immensity. This nothingness had not come before existence. It was an existence like any other, and appeared after many others. I shouted, filth! What rotten filth! And shook myself to get rid of this sticky filth, but it held fast, and there was so much, tons and tons of existence, endless. I stifled at the depths of this immense weariness, and then suddenly the park emptied us through a great hole. The world disappeared as it had come, or else I woke up in any case. I saw no more of it. Nothing was left but the yellow earth around me, out of which dead branches rose upward. I got up and went out. Once at the gate, I turned back, then the garden smiled at me. I leaned against the gate and watched for a long time. The smile of the trees, of the laurel, meant something. That was the real secret of existence. I remembered one Sunday not more than 3 weeks ago. I had already detected everywhere a sort of a conspiratorial error. Was it in my intention? I felt with boredom that I had no way of understanding. No way. Yet it was there, waiting, looking at one. It was there on the trunk of the chestnut tree. It was the chestnut tree. Things, you might have called them, thoughts which stopped halfway, which were forgotten, which forgot what they wanted to think, and which stayed like that, hanging about with an odd little sense which was beyond them. That little sense annoyed me. I could not understand it. Even if I could have stayed leaning against the gate for a century, I had learned all I could know about existence. I left, I went back to the hotel, and I wrote.